So with that, let me now move on to our next segment, which is a fireside chat. And we have with us this evening Mr. Karthik Shahani, Managing Director at Tenable India, and Ms. Rama Vedashri, CEO at DSCI, to moderate the fireside chat. And without wasting any time, I'd like to welcome the two of you and hand it over to Ms. Vedashri to take this fireside chat forward. Thank you.
What if there were a way for you to see the hidden threats and vulnerabilities all around you? On average, 25 new vulnerabilities pop up each day. What would you see on your own network? How can you keep up with these potential threats, stay on top of compliance, and ensure these issues don't cause problems for your organization? Get the insights you need to minimize threats and compliance issues with Nessus from Tenable, the industry's most widely deployed vulnerability assessment solution. More than 1 million users trust Nessus to deliver the visibility they need to catch vulnerabilities and configuration issues in their infrastructure, the context to prioritize which to address first, and the expertise to help them remain compliant. You can't eliminate vulnerabilities you can't see. With Nessus from Tenable, you'll see them all.
Yeah, both of us will be together on this thing, right? Good evening. Thanks for joining us in this fireside chat with a senior industry colleague and a friend, Karthik from Tenable. Thanks for joining us, Karthik. It's always been a pleasure to interact with you in all your roles in the industry in India. And thank you for the association of Tenable with DSCI.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah. So Karthik, you have been really an industry veteran, particularly in the security industry. In your entire career in India, you have engaged with Indian enterprises across so many, 20 plus years, I think. So what do you think what have you seen as trends that have evolved over the last 5 years, last 10 years, in the way businesses look at information security and now cybersecurity?
Yes, it's an interesting question that I get asked quite often, and I look at it and I look and see that. Look at COVID-19. It came and changed the world. It didn't just affect India, and I'm seeing that over the period of last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, there's been this massive changes in the environment. And they are actually driving what we all refer to as the whole digital transformation. And this digital transformation slowly is coming to a point where it has no boundaries. It's work from home, work from wherever. It's put so much of pressure on the IT industry in terms of how do you manage this attack surface? The attack surface has just expanded. The threat vectors have gone all over the place. There's also been this whole change of OT, which used to be a sacrosanct space where hardly anything used to happen, which is also getting targeted. So we see IoT, OT, IT, that convergence taking place, borders kind of getting blurred. And the whole issue of trying to manage this by an IT professional is a huge, huge task. And it's not for an individual, it's not for an individual department, but everyone needs to be part of this security boom and threat landscape that needs to be controlled.
When you engage with the security CIO and the CISO leadership in your roles, right? What have you seen? I mean, has the pandemic changed the scenario so much, or over the last 2-3 years, as the digital transformation journeys really took up, really took the momentum across various sectors, whether it's BFSI, whether it's retail, Now, maybe in the last 1 year, we are seeing a lot of that happening in the healthcare industry also. What is it that you are seeing in terms of priorities of the CIO and the CISO? And are you seeing an evolving strategy for security, and which you're seeing there is a game changer in the last year or two? We are looking at, a lot of them are now beginning to look at a zero trust architecture very seriously. They're looking at what can we do as we move critical mission critical workloads to the cloud. They're evaluating those kind of decisions now. What are you seeing as the changing paradigm of a CIO plus a CISO, but yeah, primarily the CISO?
Ma'am, it's a perennial discussion where you need to look at this changing landscape and how is it impacting us. There is only limited resources, limited finance. The technology is changing, the threats are changing. What should someone do? So the whole question therefore comes down to slowly becoming, how do you manage this? What should you manage in an organization? And just before this, Vishak spoke about some of the things. He's saying that the attack vectors, the time to dwell for someone in your space is something that needs to be reduced. But how are you going to do it? You can't do it unless and until you have a basic thing, which is visibility. You need to have visibility of all your assets. You also need to have a program by which you are going to actively and proactively see which are the critical assets in your whole organization. What is it that is going to actually be the game changer and create a problem in your business? If you did not have a methodology by which you could find your vulnerabilities and focus on the critical assets, it's going to be almost impossible for a CISO, CIO, or anyone else to contain and manage these attacks. And it's really important, therefore, to have a program which runs across an organization and says, how can we mitigate the risk on the least amount of critical assets that will give us the maximum protection for the organization?
And when you look at these critical assets now, the data is another completely different facet compared to just the critical technology assets or the infrastructure, IT infrastructure assets. Similarly, now in the COVID scenario, there is so much work from home happening. The perimeter is getting continuously redefined, right? And a lot of workloads moving to the cloud. So do you think that both the technology industry and the user industry is getting their arms around what really has to be the paradigm of security and strategy? And do we really understand an end-to-end enterprise vulnerability management?
I don't think I have a straight answer for that question. Vishak spoke about a few things, and that reminded me that how are we going to get our arms around this situation? And what he spoke about was that phishing is still the number one problem. Unpatched systems are still high on that threat landscape. And the question, therefore, is every year, I think COVID, there was a lot of investment that went in for work from home people, right? So a lot of money is being pumped in, but the threats aren't reducing. And the kind of losses aren't reducing. So if you look back and say, what could potentially be the problem? And very, very clearly, I believe that it is as simple as brushing your teeth every morning. It's simple hygiene. We're not doing what we should be doing on a regular basis. Example, are we scanning our networks on a daily basis to see the vulnerabilities? Similarly, are we training our people to be careful of phishing attacks? Are we doing patching on a regular basis? By you got vulnerabilities there, reports are coming. Are you patching on a regular basis? So these are all simple hygiene. And I believe that while all the threats and all of that happens, the largest attacks, the top 9 attacks in 2019 happened through phishing, unpatched systems, and weak passwords. So,
Yeah.
so the industry and the users need to follow, I think, simple hygiene. Scan every day, patch as regularly and as quickly as possible the most critical assets. Look at training your personnel so that they can identify a phishing attack. I think those are the ones, ma'am. The world hasn't changed in the last 20 years as far as the attack methodologies go.
So, Karthik, as you work with large enterprises, whether it's the CIO, CISO, sometimes I'm sure you meet CFOs and board level people to be able to convince them on their 3-year roadmap and what they should be doing. Particularly in the post pandemic world, any enterprise board, CEO, and CFO would look at trying to do more with less, right? So the return on investment of the technology investments they make, that was always there, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
at an IT level, when they're investing in a data center, when they're investing in a large business application, it's another thing. But because they would see some business returns in the near term. But when you're looking at something like security, what is the conversation that you are seeing in terms of are those questions being asked of the CISO on return on investment? When you look at this return on investment, is if I cutting this check of $1 million for your next 3 years of security and technology investment, people and all of that. I mean, how safe are we? That's the kind of questions that boards ask our CISOs, right? So how do you, when you talk to your customers, how do you convince them on investing in whatever they need to invest on?
Ma'am, it's an extremely interesting question because I'm going to look at it from another perspective. If the board or if the top management of a company has to look back and say, you know what, we invested a lot last year, what are the returns that we've got, and goes and asks the CISO, so how much was my returns? The CISO will find it extremely difficult to give a one-line answer. So he's going to take a report which is 200 pages and dump it on their table, and no one's going to read it. But that is it's not a silly question. It's a most important question because for the board to make any decision, they need to have some baseline. They need to have somewhere to say where are we with all our investments. Considering this situation, actually, we got through a process and we at Tenable look at what's called as a cyber exposure score. And the cyber exposure score is actually made up of multiple feeds. It's got an intelligence feed, it's got the vulnerabilities data from an organization, it's got the critical assets data, and we put all that information together and do an analysis to try and give that organization a score. Now it's a discrete score from 1 to 10. And there's a baseline that also exists for that industry. So you can then compare yourself with the score against the baseline for that industry. So if the board asks the CISO, how secure am I? The CISO probably can say, I'm 10% better than the industry that we are in. So your investments last year, we were 5% less. After the investments, this year we are 10% better. So it becomes a quantifiable answer which the board can look at and say, we did our best and most reasonable effort to protect the company assets and information as well as the customer's assets.
That's a very insightful perspective that for a CISO, look at whether he or she is, following leading best practices in their sector, maybe with their global peers. If they're a very large bank or a large telco, obviously they need to benchmark themselves about from not only with peers in India, but the global peers. And then you look at, how are you really leading in terms of the best practices in security, data protection, and also privacy, and be that leader in the sector. And then obviously, there are others that are going to follow you in the kind of best practices that you're setting. And conferences like AISS and the awards that we do is meant to actually share those best practices. As we wrap up, Karthik, there is this entire OT infrastructure being under serious threat, right? And whether you look at manufacturing and other critical infrastructure sectors. If you just meet a CISO of a manufacturing company, or maybe even a mid-sized manufacturing company in the elevator of a hotel in Bombay, and you have 2 minutes with him, or maybe you're going up, maybe less than 2 minutes also. So, what would be those top two, three priorities that a CISO of a manufacturing organization should consider so that he or she is able to protect their OT infrastructure?
So you put me on a spot, but I'll try and answer that. So yeah, so OT industry has been a safe haven for a very, very long time, and people have taken it for granted. That's air gap, not to worry about all of that. But the 2005 and 2010 attacks, the Stuxnet that got the nuclear program of Iran down, and then the utilities program of Ukraine, where the lights went out in 2010, are both great indicators that OT is not siloed. OT needs to be protected and to be careful. Now, if I was to look at the plant manager and had 2 minutes, I'd say you do three things. Number one, see, if you do not have visibility of what assets you have, where you have, what is happening, what threats are there, there's nothing you can do to protect it. The second one I'd say is predict. Run a vulnerability scan through your system to see, hey, if there was someone attacking me, which are the vulnerable points? Which are the devices, the network areas, the connectors where someone could potentially get in? And finally, I'd say act, which is try to mitigate the threat. So whatever vulnerabilities you've seen after you run the scan, look at the most critical one and go plug them. Put your finger in the dam which is on the most critical one. And that probably is my 2 minute pitch to that head of plant, so to say.
Yeah. I think as an industry overall, the security industry, whether it's services, products, global players like you, I think we need to do a lot more because the CISOs of the manufacturing companies, oil and gas, energy, all of them, I think they're quite worried about their OT infrastructure and the entire integration that is now happening with IT thanks to whatever they're pursuing in terms of digital.
So, ma'am, I've got a request to you. And my request is, can DSCI be that glue between the industry and people like us who got the technology and try and be the catalyst to bring us together? Because we have got the information, but we don't, and we can't go and meet so many people and be able to spread the word that we do have solutions, we do have methodologies, and we can help. So I was just wondering if DSCI could be that catalyst to bring us together.
Yes, Karthik, I think that's a good charter for us to take up. But we've been doing this. As you know, a lot of the CISOs are our members. We've been doing a lot of those sessions, but I think we need to do a lot more. For example, yesterday, Vinayak had a roundtable with the oil and energy gas sector. We'll probably try and get CISOs of the manufacturing sector together. One challenge that DSCI team has is that it seems to be easier to get competitors to collaborate from the user industry. It's a little difficult for the peers of the technology industry sometimes to come and collaborate. We'll take a shot at it in 2021. I think we need to get the OEMs of the OT side and the OEMs of the IT side and the services. Luckily, there are a lot of system integrators and services companies which span both the worlds. We'll try and get them together, and we'll engage with the CISOs and see what we can do in the next quarter.
Ma'am, look forward to that, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Karthik. Thank you for joining us here, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Same here, ma'am.